Hello, and welcome to the American Center in Moscow and our discussion of the architecture of American cities, the city of Chicago. My name is John Spurney. I am your moderator today, and I am pleased and privileged to welcome our speaker, Ward Miller. Ward is the Richard H. Driehaus Executive Director of Preservation Chicago, and he has led the organization since 2013. During that time, he has led over 100 successful advocacy efforts to protect Chicago's built environment and to strengthen the vibrancy of Chicago. And he has advocated for the preservation of Chicago's historic buildings for over 35 years. He spent 2 decades on the Issues Committee for Landmarks Illinois and served as vice president of the Logan Square Preservation for 15 years. And prior to his focus on advocacy, Miller served as an architect for Vinci-Hamp Architects, and the many restoration projects he worked on there include the Holy Family Church, Frank Lloyd Wright's Heller House, and the Grand Staircase at the Art Institute of Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Ward Miller.
Thank you so much, John, and welcome everyone. As John mentioned, I'm Ward Miller. I'm the Richard H. Driehaus Executive Director of the nonprofit organization Preservation Chicago, and so pleased to be with you here today. I wish to thank the American Center for hosting today's program and for allowing us to share cultural and architectural and historical resources overseas with all of you. In addition, we wish to thank our Preservation Chicago board and staff for their support of this program and for all of our work here in Chicago, our great advocacy work that reaches a large audience in the Chicago area. And our focus is just the city of Chicago, which keeps us actually quite busy. And also a special thanks to Adam Natenshin, our Director of Operations, and Kathy Bond, our Director of Events at Preservation Chicago, along with the staff at the American Center, and of course, John, Tessa, and others. So thank you so much for hosting us today. And with that, let's start our program. And you can see the first image is an image of a former preservationist who unfortunately passed away, a dear friend, Dev Boley, in 1971, 1972, protesting the demolition of the Chicago Stock Exchange building in Chicago in our financial district on LaSalle Street, which is sort of like our Wall Street here in Chicago. Next image, please. So this is just an idea of what our vision and mission is at Preservation Chicago. We do all of this pro bono, so we really rely on our friends in the foundation world to issue grants to support our work, and also individuals that help us sustain our operations. And we believe that we are here to protect and revitalize Chicago's irreplaceable architecture, its neighborhoods, urban green spaces, and through advocacy, outreach, education, and partnership, we try our best to influence stakeholders to pursue creative reuses and preservation-sensitive outcomes. And that also includes the landmark designation of historic buildings that are architecturally, culturally, historically of interest and of importance to Chicago. And this is part of our mission every day to encourage the preservation of these historic resources, which we feel really lends a vibrant voice to the city and encourages good outcomes and also productive neighborhoods that we can reinvest in. And that's so very important. Our next image, please. So we start off here with an overview of architecture, if you will. The built environment is so important to us at Preservation Chicago. So what we have here is the Leiter 1 building. This is by William LeBaron Jenney in 1877 to 1879. And ironically, this is across the street from our current office building, but it was demolished, and that was unfortunate. This is where William LeBaron Jenney started experimenting with steel frame construction so that you almost had a bird cage and you would hang the masonry on that steel bird cage, if you will, a steel structure. Next image. And then images of the building just before it was demolished. This is on Wells and Monroe Street. And unfortunate that it was demolished, but really an amazing structure that was the beginning of a great experiment, if you will. William LeBaron Jenney is known as the father of the skyscraper. And that skyscraper began in Chicago with experiments with this building. And then let's go through the next few slides. This is the home insurance building by William LeBaron Jenney of 1884. This was on LaSalle Street and was demolished in 1931 for a tall skyscraper, which is now a landmark. It was known as the Field Building, built by the estate of Marshall Field. But this is one of those buildings that really achieved a great height, as you can see, in 1884, using steel frame construction. Next image. And here's some pictures of the lobby. You can see the rather lavish ornament. Chicago was known for its great architectural achievements, especially after the Great Fire of 1871, which burned the entire central area of the city, portions of the south side and great portions of the north side at that moment in time in 1871. But the idea of experimenting with steel and also changing styles, not necessarily honoring those classical styles that so many other cities across the world were using to build buildings. Next slide. William LeBaron Jenney and people like John Welborn Root and Daniel Burnham and Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan and Hollerberg and Roche were really experimenting with new ideas and new styles, and not necessarily borrowing from historically appropriate styles at that time. Chicago was sort of reinventing itself and reinventing what would later become known as the skyscraper. So here's another image of the interior of the home insurance building that was unfortunately lost in about 1931. Next image. And then just pictures of the interior, and you can see because of the steel frame construction, the walls were thinner, and this allowed for more air and sunlight to come and permeate these spaces before the advent of electricity. And next image. And here you see the demolition of the building and the exploration of the structure, which confirmed that it was indeed the first skyscraper or steel framed building where the masonry could be hung on the steel structures, very much like we might see even today. Next image. And then this is the Rookery Building. This is by Burnham and Root. This is 1885, 1886. This still stands on LaSalle Street. It was one of the largest office buildings in the world at the time, by Daniel Burnham and John Welborn Root, and really a remarkable building that has been lovingly restored and is one of our premier landmarks. Next image. And you can see this beautiful interior by John Root and Daniel Burnham, but also remodeled by one of the world's most recognized architects, Frank Lloyd Wright, who came in and remodeled this building. And then it was lovingly restored about 25, 30 years ago with its skylight restored, and the building actually revisioned to accommodate modern offices on LaSalle Street, which is our financial part of a mainstay of our financial district in Chicago. Next image, please. And then some beautiful details of the staircase within the Rookery. So you're kind of getting a sense of what 19th century Chicago looked like in the 1880s. And while we look at this next image, while we look at these beautiful details, remember that this was considered very forward thinking and very modern. We may not necessarily visualize that or think about this as the most modern idea today, but certainly in the 1880s, it was really revolutionary. Next image. And then this is the auditorium building by Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan. And this was really the envy of the United States and perhaps the world. It was a combination hotel that you see in the front, an office building that you see in the tower, some commercial spaces, but also housing a 4,500 seat theater or opera house. And this is on Michigan Avenue and still one of our stellar landmarks as part of these sort of world-renowned buildings that we celebrate in Chicago. Next image. And here it is, a sort of a more contemporary image with the Fine Arts Building next door. This was sort of the heart of Chicago's cultural scene, if you will, and cultural district, with the auditorium being really, as I mentioned earlier, the envy of the world. But it was supported by the hotel and office building that surrounded it. So really a remarkable structure. Next image. And this gives you some idea of the auditorium and the functions of the building. The tower, by the way, the top of the tower held Adler and Sullivan's offices, where Frank Lloyd Wright apprenticed. But you can see the theater in sort of the middle section, and how the hotel and office building wraps around it, and with entrances on various, really all three sides of the building. A really remarkable structure. Next image. And then just an idea of the detail, this rich detail by Adler and Sullivan, where the light bulbs, again, a new technology, were sort of studded, if you will, into the ornament, and the ventilation system, as you can see there with these decorative half circular vents. It was integrated into the design and into the ornament, and they would actually blow fans on large blocks of ice to air condition this building that really opened in 1890 fully. Next image. And then a beautiful image of the interior of the auditorium theater within the auditorium building. This is a remarkable space. It's acoustically perfect in many people's opinions. You can whisper on one side of those arches, or also from the stage, and be heard across the auditorium. With that said, they always seem to mic everybody so that the performance is well heard. Next image. And then we just wanted to go back in time a little bit to the Tacoma building by Halliburton and Roche of 1888, 1889. And you can begin to see on LaSalle Street here the idea that the steel frame allowed for this sort of undulation of the facade, and many punctured windows. And this would not necessarily be possible if you had a solid masonry building where you're starting with a wall that at its base could be about 6 feet thick and become thinner as it goes up, but that would create very narrow windows. These were very large windows, and you can see that the glass is almost, greater than 50% of the facades of this building. Unfortunately, this building was demolished in the 1930s for a modernist, what we would now call an Art Deco high-rise, but a really beautiful building on LaSalle Street, just the same, which is a landmark. And I think these buildings really do honor oftentimes their predecessors. Next image. And then the Chamber of Commerce building is also another fine example of the masonry being further reduced and the windows becoming more apparent. And next image. And then these beautiful spaces, an atrium carved inside this 1889 building that allowed for, circulation to offices and whatnot, but also allowed for this beautiful skylight to radiate sunlight down into the atrium, really creating a light and airy building. And you'll see this time and time again in Chicago, where these atrium spaces, these really beautiful spaces that inspire people, become part of the architectural lexicon of what defines a great building. Next image. And then here we have the Leiter 2 building by William LeBaron Jenney. So this was built just a number of years after the first Leiter 1 building as a department store. And again, you can see how the windows puncture the facade, and the masonry is almost reduced to sort of a minimalist quality. Next image. And so you can see sort of how the introduction of steel or any type of metal framing to these buildings really does allow for a different type of architecture that wasn't seen previously. And again, this came in part because of Jenney's career as serving as a Union officer and bridge builder for the Union Army during the Civil War, the American Civil War, but also the idea of bringing materials that would sort of make bridges, if you will, and introducing them to architecture after, of course, the Chicago fire of 1871, which is so devastating to the central area and to our city as a whole. Next image. And then just more images of the Lighter 2 building. This building was just sold recently. It served as 2 department stores in its lifetime. I remember it fondly. It's on State Street, which is one of our most incredible retail streets along with Michigan Avenue, and just a fine street to sort of talk about and see and witness sort of this museum of incredible early Chicago steel frame skyscraper buildings. Next image. And then we have the Manhattan building, but also by William LeBaron Jenney at 16 stories. Believe it or not, this was once one of the world's tallest buildings. It was reported to be the tallest building in the world. This is from 1890, and you can see how the building continues to rise in height. Obviously, the introduction of the elevator, but again, the steel frame is allowing buildings to go higher, taller, and this same technology is being used even today. This is part of Printers Row. Next image. And you can see its beautiful undulating facade, the introduction of this beautiful ornament. This was actually turned from an office building that was on Printers Row into apartments in the 1980s and restored. And it's really one of our great skyscrapers that lines Dearborn Street, also another street of great architectural buildings. Next image. And then we have buildings like the Garrick, or originally known as the Schiller building by Dankmar, Adler, and Louis Sullivan from 1890. This was an amazing building. As you're looking down Randolph Street, you also see the Masonic Temple by Burnham and Root. At that moment in time, 22 stories, the tallest building in the world. And this image was taken about the time of the World's Fair, the first Chicago World's Fair, or Columbian Exposition of 1893. And unfortunately, we lost this building. Next image. We lost this building in 1960, 61, as it was demolished, but its demolition triggered what we call the American interest in architecture and preservation. Next image. And you can see the beautiful assembly of great ornament, especially at the loggia level, but also that in the last image you saw the great soaring skyscraper quality of the Garrick or Schiller building. And Frank Lloyd Wright also held offices in this building, and he was working at the firm at the time this was constructed. But really a remarkable building, as I mentioned. Next image. The beautiful proscenium that you see, this really impacted me growing up in Chicago, that this space in this beautiful theater could be lost in this building, but it really did trigger the idea of preserving historic buildings in 1960-61. And there was a national, if not worldwide, appeal to save this building. It was really remarkable, but it was demolished, ironically, for a parking lot, which is just wrenching to think about. Next image. And then here's an image of the demolition occurring. Many components of this building, its facade, its even plaster ornament from the theater and other spaces have been preserved in museums around the world. And you know, it's just remarkable that this building was demolished. It did begin the beginnings of the preservation movement in America, and then a few years later, Penn Station in New York City was threatened with demolition, and there was also a protest to save these kinds of buildings, which the public didn't quite understand at that moment in time. If you were an architect or architectural historian, you may realize the importance of these buildings, but the average passerby may not have understood that 60 years ago, but we've done a great job in the decades since to understand and celebrate these landmarks. And now through education, we've really had a lot of individuals that are familiar with Chicago's architecture, and it's a great source of heritage tourism to our city. Next image. This is the Great Northern Hotel, another Burnham and Root building that was unfortunately demolished. Ironically, this stands on part of Mies van der Rohe's Federal Center now. Next image. And an image of the beautiful lobby. Next image. And then a building that we still have. This is the Monadnock building by Burnham and Root. This is 1890 to 1892. And you can see that this building, next image, does have those soaring qualities, but it also is known for its north half by Burnham and Root for these heavy masonry walls. This was a building that was built with very little steel. It's basically a load-bearing wall, and you can see how the window openings are narrow, tall and narrow, and they have a great depth to them, and that creates a little bit of a sense of darkness, whereas the bay windows begin to capture the light. But the Monadnock building is a 16-story skyscraper, one of the tallest in the world when it was built. It's been beautifully restored by a single owner, and we were involved in this effort when I worked at Vinci-Hamp Architects. But I just wanted to share with you the beautiful qualities of this and that beautiful upward slope that John Root was responsible for, and the paring down of ornament. A very modern building for 1890. Next image. And then here you get a sense of that height, that scale, that girth. Next image. And then some of the beautiful ornament within the building, these beautiful staircases, some of which we restored in addition to the lobby. Next image. And then the Ashland block by Burnham and Root. This was unfortunately demolished in the 1930s, 1940s, actually maybe perhaps even into the early 1950s for a Greyhound bus station. And you can also see the Garrick Schiller building to the right of the image, but a really amazing structure that is one of those forgotten buildings. We have some legacy buildings that were demolished, unfortunately, in different times. And this is one of those that is oftentimes forgotten, but very similar to the old Colony building by another firm. So you're beginning to see these Chicago architects move back and forth and watch what is being constructed. Next image. And then the Masonic Temple, I made mention to this earlier. This was the tallest building in the world at its time of construction and completion. It was 22 stories with a very large 20-story atrium that you'll see in the next image. Unfortunately, this was demolished in 1939. Next image. It was replaced by a taxpayer building. They were building the Red Line subway at the time, and all foundations needed to be further reinforced at that time at great expense. And buildings like the Masonic Temple on State Street had just lost some of their appeal, and it was determined to demolish the building, which was very unfortunate. Next image. And then we have buildings like Halliburton Roche's Marquette building. This is 1893, and this was a very progressive building. And you also see the Chicago window really developing. If you haven't seen it in the past, it's a large fixed center light of glass or pane of glass, and then two operable double hung windows on each side, which really allowed for light and air to come in. But that big center window really allowed for visitors to peer out, but also for sunlight to penetrate the inside of the building. And of course, the operable windows before the technologies that we have today for air conditioning and heating were brought about and allowed for ventilation on each side of this large picture window. Next image. And then, a detail of the entrance, which with these sculptural panels of Father Marquette and Louis Joliet, early explorers to the Chicago area and to the nation as they traversed through the Chicago area back in 1673. So it's really a building that honors part of Father Marquette's legacy. Next image. And then a view of the lobby, just to give you an idea of what these spaces were like inside. So you're looking at an 1893 interior with these Tiffany mosaics that wrap around the lobby, really indicating the life of Father Marquette and how he approached the people he encountered in 1673 in America, noting the native peoples here, all the way to his untimely death, all captured in this beautiful Tiffany, Louis Comfort Tiffany mosaic. Next image. And then the old Colony building. This is very similar if you compare it to the Ashland block. Different, of course, different firm, but really noticing and acknowledging those beautiful bay windows, those corner bay windows that were really a structural feat at the time that couldn't have been done without the introduction of steel. And the old Colony building is another one of our great landmarks along Dearborn Street, and it has been restored from and revisioned from an office building to apartments in the last 10 years or so. Next image. And then just a shot of one of the corners of the old Colony building. Again, one of the great legacy buildings of Chicago. Next image. And then we come to the Chicago Stock Exchange building by Adler and Sullivan. This was on LaSalle Street, Chicago's financial district once again. And this was unfortunately demolished in 1971, 10 years after the Garrick Schiller building. And this was really part of a big effort to understand and recognize and protect and even landmark our great buildings of Chicago. Unfortunately, it was lost, but the arch was moved to the Art Institute of Chicago. The trading room that was on the second floor of the building was moved also to the Art Institute, where it currently stands as a reconstructed interior room. It's really a fabulous space. And unfortunately, the building was lost, but components of this building are also in museums around the world. And even a section of this large cornice stands in front of St. Ignatius College Prep High School in Chicago. And it's an immensely beautiful, highly decorative cornice. The next image. And just to give you an idea of the size of the building, the undulation of the facade, this beautiful entrance, further enhanced by the series of semicircular arches that are above the entrance. Louis Sullivan, the principal designer, Dankmar Adler being, an incredible structural engineer and acoustician, and just knowing so much about steel construction. With Louis Sullivan, there was really a celebration of the arch. You'll see these beautiful arches in many of his structures, including the auditorium building and some of their houses, and of course at the Garrick Schiller building as well. Next image. And then this is an image of the Chicago Stock Exchange trading room at the Art Institute as it was removed from that building and restored here by Vinci-Hamp Architects. This is John Vinci, Lawrence Kenny, with the Art Institute, with Alice Heller of the Heller Foundation supporting its recreation. And so many components of this were rescued from the original building, but also many different replications were created through research and recovery of stencils and ornament. But really a beautiful room that sits at the Art Institute of Chicago and is an artwork in itself as far as we are concerned. Next image. And then just a quick image of the building as it was being prepared for demolition, and some details of the cornice on the right. But you can see how the soiled building, in the LaSalle Street Canyon, which was not, the building was not cleaned. It had some remodelings at its base, but fairly intact. But this building, unlike many of our landmarks today, have been lovingly restored, cleaned, and you really understand their beauty. And when they are soiled with coal soot from 75 years prior, and a lot of pollution that we experienced throughout our major cities, you can see how its design and maybe perception by the public was sometimes impacted. Next image. And then we have the New York Life building. This is by William LeBaron Jenney, again, the father of the skyscraper. This is one of our great successes at Preservation Chicago. It was an office building for the New York Life Insurance Company, and it's now a hotel. Next image. And here's a really amazing image that we used to talk about why this building was important. As you can see, the base of the building has this granite and stone base and celebrated entries from Monroe and LaSalle Street. This is also on LaSalle Street, our heart of our financial district. But they ran out of material for the stone, or it wasn't delivered in time for that second and third floor, and yet they continued to hang the masonry in terracotta and brick above, and it must have looked like this building was being held up. The upper floors of this building were held up by toothpicks, and here you can see the steel structure really expressed, not only at its top, which was under construction, but also the fact that you didn't have to place one brick or one stone on top of one another, that this steel structure, or this sort of bird cage, if you will, the steel bird cage could hold this masonry up in the air almost magically. And this picture was taken during the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. And 50 architects from around the world requested drawings from this building because they were amazed by the structure. And 27 million people had visited Chicago, many of them wandering through the Loop, even though the fair site was 8 miles away by train. This was really a remarkable structure. And this is a remarkable photograph that was seen over and over again. Almost magic how that masonry could be held up by these thin steel columns. Next image. And then the building today, cleaned and operating as the Hotel Gray. We were honored to be one of the first guests in the hotel, which is just a block from our office. But this building was facing demolition along with 2 other buildings next to it. So 3 buildings in a row by William LeBaron and Jenny Father, the skyscraper. We were able to have a successful outcome. Next image. And then the Reliance building. This is by Burnham and Root, 1894 to 1895. And you can really see in the Reliance building the idea of the masonry wall really being reduced to almost nothing, and an amazing glass building evolving, and a skyscraper that soars up to a roof with this beautiful flat plane to sort of end the building. So you have a definite, and this was one of the attributes of the Chicago School, and Louis Sullivan talked about this a lot, where you, much like a column, you have a definite base, which is the ground floor, a shaft, which is sort of that middle section, and then a top section or cornice, which is almost like the capital of a column, but in relationship to a building. So really the skyscraper is being perfected more and more in this small area of downtown Chicago where so much is happening. And we're sort of in a race with New York City, if you will, for the tallest building in the world. And this really started in the 1880s, which is really remarkable. Next image. And just a detail of the Reliance building. And you can see how the facade undulates. You can see those large windows, the operable windows. Really almost, it's like a tall skyscraper perfected, if you will. Next image. And this building was restored and turned into a hotel about 25 years ago. And it's on State Street across from some of our former retail store buildings, and really a remarkable building that's really celebrated and honored after falling into disrepair for quite a number of decades prior to the 1990s. Next image. And then the Fisher Building by D.H. Burnham. So this is Daniel Burnham. Again, you're seeing this this integration of steel. This is another one of our celebrated landmarks, as is the Reliance building and others. Next image. And you can see the beautiful terracotta. Chicago is a terracotta center. They were not able to originally clad buildings like this fully in terracotta, but they figured out the formula for shrinkage, and therefore these buildings could be completely covered in terracotta with repeating patterns versus carving them in stone. So Chicago really became a center for the arts and arts and crafts movement, and as well as terracotta and this sort of skyscraper construction. So next image, and then a detail of the Fisher Building and its upper facades. Next image. And then buildings like the Chicago Cultural Center. And this is what was built as the Chicago Public Library in 1897. And we just wanted to put this in the slide mix to show sort of an overview of what was going on in Chicago. And here we have a building that looks to more of a classical type of theme. Next image. With its beautiful interiors and its, marble staircases inset with, Tiffany mosaics and Favril glass and these beautiful domes. Next image. And here's one of the domes. This is said to be Louis Comfort Tiffany and Tiffany and Company's largest dome that they ever created. Next image. And then buildings like the Carson Perry Scott store. This was originally built as Schlesinger and Mayer. Carson Perry Scott, unfortunately, left this store a number of years ago, and it's now known as Sullivan Center, but really a remarkable building where Louis Sullivan in 1899 begins the smaller half on the far left side of the screen, the 9-story, and then continues the wraparound to 12 stories in that period of 1904 with the Daniel Burnham edition going to 1906. But this is where you're really stretching all these materials, cast iron, terracotta, and glass, almost to the point where you feel like it could shatter if you were to stretch it any longer. And next image, please. And an image of it today. You can see this white terracotta that was originally supposed to be marble, white marble, this cast iron base. Next image, with this beautiful leafy ornament, which was originally supposed to be bronze, but it was painted this bronze color. It was cast iron. Next image. And just beautifully captured here and rendered with Louis Sullivan's, wonderfully recognized ornament. This was articulated in drawing form by Elmsley. And then another image close up of the Carson Perry Scott detail. And ironically, this image is by Richard Nickel, one of our great architectural photographers, who was tragically killed in the Chicago Stock Exchange building as it was being demolished after an incredible advocacy effort. And this image is really beautiful. It, as you can see, it's the beginning of our book on Adler and Sullivan that I was able to complete with John Vinci, started by Richard Nickel and Aaron Siskind a number of years back. And this image also hangs in the Commission on Chicago Landmarks office. So it's really a beautiful image we wanted to share with you. Next image. And then buildings like the Chicago building of 1904, this is also on State Street. And again, you can see a lot of the qualities of the earlier buildings appearing in this structure, whether it's the Chicago Stock Exchange or some of those earlier buildings, even the Reliance building where you're seeing that undulating facade. Next image. And then this wouldn't be a tour of Chicago's architecture without mentioning Frank Lloyd Wright. So we wanted to insert Frank Lloyd Wright's Roby House, Frederick C. Roby House of 1909. This is one of many images and buildings and commissions by Frank Lloyd Wright that exists in Chicago and also in nearby Oak Park. But we're very honored to have such buildings as the Roby House that were published and known on the world stage. Next image. And then buildings from the 1920s that came after Louis Sullivan and Dankmar Adler and Halliburton and Roche and Burnham and Root. But this was sort of the beginning of really adapting some of these European styles in Chicago as sort of a new gateway and a new theme for skyscraper construction, thought of as modern. Some didn't think of it as modern, but these are now celebrated landmarks that are so important to our skyline and so iconic to the city of Chicago. So we'll go through these kind of quickly. We have the Wrigley building here. Next image, and a detail of that. Another image of the Chicago Tribune Tower. This was by Hood and Howells. This was part of an international competition to design the world's most beautiful building, quote unquote. And it's a Gothic skyscraper. And you're beginning to see this trickle into other buildings across our nation and across our world in the 1920s. Next image. And then buildings that were part of the Art Deco movement which sort of border Art Moderne. This is the Chicago Board of Trade at the foot of LaSalle Street. Again, the foot of our financial district, and really remarkable building, which set the prices on grain and pork bellies and all sorts of products that were marketed across the world. Board of Trade is an extremely important building by Halliburton and Root. So here you are seeing the next generation of architects, John Halliburton and John Root Jr. Next image. A detail of series on top of the building. You can see the beautiful Art Deco stylized ornament. Next image. And this beautiful lobby that you enter into the Board of Trade building. Next image. And then buildings like the Carbon and Carbide building by Daniel Burnham's son, Burnham Brothers, which integrates this sort of deep green terracotta and gold features. Next image. And this is one of our celebrated Art Deco landmarks, also on Michigan Avenue. So you're seeing this in relationship to the Tribune Tower and the Wrigley building, which refer more back to some of classical buildings and classical styles. And then you've got this great Art Deco landmark, if you will. Next image. And then just a quick detail of the lobby. We'll continue on. And then you get to Mies van der Rohe coming to Chicago in 1937 from Germany. And you have him experimenting also with continuing that idea of the skyscraper building, reducing the amount of masonry, or even in this case, exposed steel or covered steel, and really making these large glass boxes, which he started thinking about and working on sketches for and drawings in the 1920s. And here we have two buildings along Lake Michigan. That's Lake Michigan in the background in the Streeterville neighborhood from 1948, 1949. And these are sort of the beginnings of that glass box, that international style that we're also known for. It's continuation, if you will, of the Chicago School of Architecture and also the skyscraper. Next image. And then buildings such as IIT's Crown Hall. This is the Illinois Institute of Technology. I studied in this sort of a one-room schoolhouse and studio. Next image. Mies van der Rohe's Chicago Federal Center with a sculpture by Alexander Calder dating from the 1950s. Its initial design to its completion in 1975. A remarkable commission and a really celebrated modernist landmark in Chicago. Next image. And then such buildings as the Inland Steel building from 1958. This was the first building built in downtown Chicago after World War II and the Depression. Another remarkable Chicago landmark by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And then such buildings as Marina City, where Bertrand Goldberg is really working with concrete, reinforced concrete, and using it almost as a very playful, almost malleable and shapeable material in these two buildings, which are often referred to like corn cobs, but a remarkable set of buildings that were really one of the first structures built downtown for downtown residents to live and play 24/7. Next image. And then buildings such as the Hancock Center. This was built in 1968, 1970. This was actually the second tallest building in the world. It's lining Michigan Avenue. You're seeing the parking garage in the foreground. It's really a steel structure that continues all the way down to the ground, but really a remarkable building that was once, as I mentioned, the second tallest building in the world. And it was actually designed originally to be the tallest building in the world, to top the Empire State Building. Next image. And then the Sears Tower, which was the tallest building in the world for many decades, finished in 1974 by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And this is, a remarkable building that's part of Chicago's sort of newer financial district along Wacker Drive, South Wacker Drive. And again, employing, just like the Hancock, employing many of the principles of the early Chicago school buildings. And one of the most remarkable things is that Chicago is still the center of the design of many structures. One of our great exports is the design of many structures, some of the world's tallest that you'll see across the world, but really based on some of the technologies first experimented and employed with here in Chicago, and dating back to those very early buildings. Next image. And then buildings like Prentice Hospital, also by Bertrand Goldberg. Unfortunately, we lost this one recently as the hospital expands. But you can see the way Bertrand Goldberg was really sort of shaping these concrete forms that were really unusual. And of course, this is all before CAD technology, and working out those dimensions and those curves was really a challenge. And those cantilevers for those various petals, if you will, were incredibly hard to achieve with reinforced concrete at that moment in time. And yet these are some of the celebrated landmarks or buildings that were never landmarked, frankly, but part of a long fight to save this building, and unfortunately it came down a number of years ago. Next image, please. So we just wanted to really capture really quickly some of our success and creative reuse efforts. Of course, you've seen some of the others already, but while we're at it, let's just so this is the London Guarantee Building, also known as the London House Hotel. It's opposite the Wrigley Building at this really grand space, as you saw with the Wrigley Building and the Tribune Tower, one of what we consider one of the world's great outdoor rooms, great spaces. And this conforms to the site, and it was originally the site of Fort Dearborn, one of our initial settlements in Chicago, and a great reuse from a former office building to a hotel. Next image. And then the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel, also on Michigan Avenue. This is in a landmark district. It's flanked by Louis Sullivan's Gage Building and the Willoughby structure. But if you didn't know better, you'd think you were on the Grand Canal in Venice. A beautiful structure, one of our landmarks, converted from a club to a hotel. And just an image on the next slide of one of the rich interiors. There are amazing amount of rooms of this same type of quality that exist. And this building is continuously full of people coming in and out of it. And we really help to encourage the preservation of the entire L-shaped building. Next image. And then buildings like the Cedar Hotel, where the facade was integrated, but actually the facade was taken off, the building demolished, and the facade restored with the tower that grows out of it. But unfortunately, the tower is set back so much so that you don't always realize that it's part of that building. It almost looks like another building located behind this historic building. Next image. And then buildings like Cook County Hospital, this was threatened with demolition for many years. And we and our partner organizations in Chicago and the state of Illinois and across the country worked with us to save this remarkable building, which went from being a hospital to a hotel and office building. Just a remarkable building that would have cost tens of millions of dollars to demolish. Why not spend all those monies to restore the building and revision it? Next image. And then the old Chicago Main Post Office. This was the largest post office in the world at the time of its construction. It still may have been when it closed about 30 years ago, but this was considered a building that kept growing and growing to accommodate the packages and the mail order business of Montgomery Ward and Company, one of our great retailers, and Sears Roebuck, otherwise known as Sears. And so the building just became this mammoth structure to handle the packages that were being shipped through it. And this building was abandoned, if you will, or sold or replaced, if you will, by a building across the street, which looks more like a parking garage than a stellar building representing the U.S. Post Office. We worked to save this building, as many thought it was too big and too large and didn't have enough natural light into the center of the building, and we persevered and encouraged this to be landmarked and reused. And unfortunately, it was renovated by 601W out of New York that saw the vision, and now this is home to multinational companies. Next image. And then a view of the lobby, which has been restored. And next image. And then we wanted to end really on our advocacy efforts on the state of Illinois Thompson Center. This was a building built in the heart of the Loop. It was threatened with demolition. It was part of an advocacy campaign for many years. It's now being revisioned. The glass is being replaced with insulated glass. It has a 17-story atrium, not really too much different than the Masonic Temple or the Marshall Field store or some of the other buildings we saw with these incredible atriums. And this is going to be Google's Midwest headquarters one day in the next year and a half. And then we wanted to just cut to our building. This is our building, the Williams Building by Halliburton and Roche. It was part of the manufacturing and wholesale district in Chicago, where they made and manufactured clothes, and you'd come from different parts of the country to order a quantity of shirts and coats and silk scarves and whatnot. And this was the heart of the manufacturing district, which is now an extension of our retail district. And we just wanted to share some quick images of our office, just to share with you. The next image, please. So this is our office with all recycled materials, donated materials. The light fixtures were donated to us from a lighting company. It's really a beautiful place to work. Next image. You can see the amount of light. Again, this is a Chicago school building, so it's got a steel frame and this brick facade. Next image. And here's an image of one of our libraries. This is the Mary Ellen Day Mateo Library, which we're very honored to have Mary Ellen sponsored. And ironically, the bookcases were designed by Charlie Vins, one of our board members who worked with Theaster Gates. And the bookcases were milled at Lathrop Homes, one of our Chicago 7 most endangered sites. Next image. And then a little image of our conference room and a number of books that we were able to take from and rescue from the Chicago Tribune and their library of books on Chicago, Illinois history and architectural history that came to us when the Freedom Center was closed and demolished for the new Bally's Casino. Next image. And we just wanted to thank you all for joining us today, sharing the legacy of Chicago, its rich architectural, historical, and cultural history, which we try to save each and every day and try to protect with, when possible, a Chicago landmark designation so these buildings are preserved in perpetuity. So thank you.
Thank you, Ward. Watching your talk, it's kind of heartbreaking how many of those buildings were demolished. But it's also incredibly heartening that there are people like you who are preserving them and all the ones that have been preserved. And, it's such a great service really to humanity, to preserve these incredibly beautiful buildings. We're going to take questions from the chat, but I want to ask you, I live in Los Angeles now, but I spent most of my life in Manhattan. And, an incredible effect on architecture in Manhattan was the 1916 zoning resolution, which for people who don't know, in Manhattan, there were also skyscrapers. And around the turn of the 20th century, they were getting so tall that no sunlight could reach the streets. So the city passed a law with a sort of mathematical formula so that the taller a building was, the more it had to be set back from the street to allow in sun. So that's why you get in New York these sort of famous tiered birthday cake like skyscrapers. I'm just wondering, was there any sort of, because looking at the more modern buildings you showed, they didn't seem to have that tiering effect that you see so often in New York. Was there any kind of zoning effect on architecture in the early 20th century in Chicago?
Absolutely. There was such talk in the 1890s, especially, and then also in the 1920s. And Louis Sullivan, actually, Adler and Sullivan had a design for a 35-story Oddfellows temple, which had these series of setbacks. You know what? In Chicago, like when you look at the Board of Trade building or some of those Art Deco style landmarks, you will see the setbacks. I think the magic here with the Chicago skyscrapers is the setbacks are not as severe or as noticeable. It's almost like the way the massing is integrated. A lot of these Art Deco skyscrapers were very massive buildings that really worked with these beautiful forms. And you even see that happening in the Sears Tower in 1974, as well as the 1920s and early 1930s buildings before the Depression and the war hit. So you will see the setbacks. The architects were wrestling with that, how to resolve it in a really beautiful way. And people notice the setbacks, but you don't notice the setbacks as prominently as you might in other places. Where in New York, there was such a volume of these buildings going up with the setbacks that were, maybe there was a little more of an exaggeration there, where I think the Chicago architects really emphasized the height so much, as of course they did in New York as well and other places. But I think it's a different type of massing and approach that separates the two cities and their built environment. And I think that's so beautiful. When you think of the Chrysler Building, you think of that beautiful tall tower with that beautiful fan of ornament and the spire, if you will. And we didn't really have that. We had more of a massive culmination of forms that reach the sky. Obviously there are exceptions to that, but I think that massiveness, broad shoulders, Carl Sandburg poem resonates through in our architecture, where I think in New York, that architecture, that Art Deco style was a little more stylized, a little more delicate. I think we approached it with sort of like a heavy fist. But beautiful, all beautiful.
The city of broad shoulders. There's a question here. Sorry, another New York-based question. I think even most Americans think of New York as the epicenter of the skyscraper. And of course, I was amazed when I lived there to discover that it's really Chicago that invented and perfected the form. And I think not only do very few people outside of the United States know that, I think very few Americans know that. This question from the audience, in New York, Robert Moses had a great influence on 20th century architecture, despite the controversial ways he had done things. And for those who don't know, Robert Moses there's a great biography of him called The Power Broker, which I highly recommend, but he had an incredible effect on New York architecture in the 20th century. And this person asks, was there a similar person in the developmental history of Chicago? And if so, who was it?
Sure. So, we had large land clearances in Chicago, even before urban renewal, with the idea that, a skyscraper should be set in like a natural environment, almost looking to Le Corbusier and his work. And then you see that in places like Lake Meadows and in other developments. And quality of life issues come into play here. But there was a sort of heavy-handedness with some of Chicago's approaches to architecture and land clearance, and of course urban renewal factors into this, where a lot of people in areas that were at a loss for reinvestment, neighborhoods of disinvestment, or neighborhoods of people of color were displaced, and that sort of factors into, I think, every major city beginning in the late 1950s and continuing into the 1970s, if you will. We did have some of that, and the design firms and developers were really responsible for that, along with our former Mayor Richard J. Daley, the first Mayor Daley, who really wanted to see a lot of what he referred to as a slum reinvigorated, and it was approached in a variety of different ways, where some areas were almost like a donut, and everything around it was cleared, and then there were other approaches where it was a scorched earth, and beginning from the grass level, the ground grassroots level, and starting again. Yes, we've had lots of areas like that, especially on Chicago's south and west sides, where there were a variety of different neighborhoods that were occupied by a variety of different people and different ethnicities.
And so the buildings that you were showing that were primarily from the 1880s, 1890s, the ones that were demolished, did that happen under the rubric of urban renewal, or was it just sheer kind of capitalism?
It was
Or
sheer
both?
capitalism, and some of those buildings, the earliest buildings, were demolished in the 1930s. So long before some of these other
Right.
issues came up, right? But probably on people's minds. So it was really capitalism and the idea of building a taller building on these sites, and some of these taller buildings are frankly landmarks now, and we recognize this whole history and this legacy, even though it's painful to see some of these demolitions, which should have never happened, perhaps. You see this continuing legacy in the buildings that were designed thereafter and continue to today. And now I think there's a greater honoring, respect, and appreciation for these buildings by also the general public. And before, it was really mostly limited to academics and architects and architectural historians that understood the achievements in Chicago, especially with skyscraper construction, the introduction of steel frame, but even the work of Bertrand Goldberg and people like Frank Lloyd Wright, architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, probably the world's most recognized architect, and his sort of experiments with different forms and masses and spans, and he was his work extends all the way to Tokyo with the Imperial Hotel.
Did Wright ever build a skyscraper in Chicago? I know there was some crazy plan for like a mile-high building, right? But did he ever actually build a skyscraper in Chicago?
There was the mile-high skyscraper, and then there was also, which would have been really remarkable. You can't even imagine what went into that, in a beautiful building for Michigan Avenue. But no, Frank Lloyd Wright never built a skyscraper, with one exception, in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, that is ironically going through some challenges with a series of owners. But no, he was never able to achieve a skyscraper in Chicago or elsewhere, with the exception of Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and the Price Tower.
And is that building still there?
Yes, it is. It is. As a matter of fact, one of the previous owners was also listing some of the original furnishings for sale, and one of our partner organizations, the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy, was able to intervene.
Oh, great. So someone from the audience asks, can we say that Chicago architecture is a purely American style of architecture?
Oh yes, this is all
You can say it.
This is all part of America's history, and it's not just limited to Chicago, but we like to brag a lot here. I think that as time goes on, Chicago is recognized for its heritage, tourism, and its built environment. And I have no stats on this, but when I walk through the Loop, I see and hear more different languages and people pointing up to skyscrapers, and talking about why these are special. And I think that's due to our partnership and our advocacy of all of our preservation organizations. And the Chicago Architecture Center does regular tours on foot through the Loop, or downtown Chicago in the central area. They also do boat tours from the river and also Lake Michigan. I think all of this is helping to spread that word. And of course, social media and programs like this also acknowledge that. So thank you. Grateful for the acknowledgement here.
Yeah, my brother took a boat tour, architecture tour of Chicago when he lived in Chicago, and he said it was like the greatest thing he had ever done. And my niece just moved to Chicago, so he basically forced her to do it as well, and she said it was the greatest thing she had ever done. So
one by one,
yeah.
we'll take all of you, and just want to welcome all of everyone to Chicago, and to reach out to us and our partner organizations for tours. Follow us on our advocacy. We have a free newsletter that's sometimes 200 pages a month. If you go to preservationchicago.org, we have about 10,000 people on that. We're at just about every Landmarks Commission hearing, giving that independent voice to the city and the Landmarks Commission to know that we do support this independently, these landmark designations, and it's so very, very special. We're blessed and honored to be part of this organization and part of a group of organizations and people to represent the larger masses, but to really honor and designate and save these buildings in perpetuity. We've lost a lot, but we also have an incredible amount of architecture remaining. And this is not the full spectrum of what's out there. We just sort of pulled some very special, notable buildings that have been published in books around the world, and highlighted those and tried our best to highlight these architects all within a 45, 50-minute period, if you will, online. So grateful to the American Center, and John, to you and Tessa and staff, along with our staff and board, to help present this and to share this information with our partners and friends overseas.
Well, thank you so much, Ward. It's been an incredibly interesting hour. And thanks to everybody who watched. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.